Hey everybody, welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. How are you today? My name is Stephanie, and if you're new to my channel, welcome. It's great to have you here. So this show is a show that I do where I just put on my makeup and talk about whatever happens to be on my mind. And today, I get curious about these things and I just dive into the history of them. And I decided to dive into the history of Santa Claus. Now, it's not entirely new to me. I have read up on the jolly old elf a few times, but I went in a little bit deeper this time and I found some interesting things and I thought I would share them with you. But before we get into that, how are you? Are you ready? If you celebrate Christmas, are you ready for Friday? I am as ready as I'm going to be. I don't know how others would define ready, but I'm ready as I can be. Being a single parent at Christmas is interesting. I don't know. I grew up with siblings and a mom and a dad, so Christmas always feels a little bit weird to me because it's just me and my son. But it is what it is, and whatever it is, I'm ready for it. And I hope you are too. So, Santa Claus. We all know who he is. He's actually kind of famous, and I think most people around the world know who Santa Claus is. But do you know how we got Santa Claus? He didn't just spring up out of nowhere. He actually has quite an interesting history. Most people, I think, know that Santa Claus has his roots in St. Nicholas. And St. Nicholas was a bishop who was born in, now he wasn't born a bishop. I should probably clarify that. He wasn't born Bishop Nicholas. He was just born Nicholas, and he was born in 270 AD. And we don't know a lot about his life. Most of what we know about him, as far as how he became a saint and how he became known for his generosity and so forth, a lot of that stuff was written long after he was after he'd passed away. But the few things that we do know for certain are he was a bishop in what is modern day Turkey. He was persecuted for his defense of the church during the Great Persecution in 303, and he was actually imprisoned for his defense of the church doctrines. And he would remain in prison for several years until Constantine stopped the persecution of Christians. And then he was released from prison and went on to be such a great guy that when he passed away, people were like, you know what we should do? We should make him a saint. Now, the things that he's associated with are extraordinary generosity. And there are a couple of legends that speak to this. And he was also known as kind of like a miracle worker. Like if you had St. Nicholas, or Bishop Nicholas at the time, praying on your behalf, wonderful things were, according to legends associated with him, were pretty much guaranteed to happen. I mean, if you had him praying for you, you were all set. You did not have to worry. Some of the things that were associated with him, though, were, of course, we all know, the giving of gifts to the children, but there are also others. There is a story associated with Nicholas in which 3 young women they felt like they were destined to a life of prostitution. Their father was very poor. He was deep in debt. He had no dowry for his daughters, and having few options, so having no dowry meant they probably were not going to get married, and obviously being women at the time, they were not going to have a lot of professional options available to them, so they had to support themselves somehow. So it was like, you know what, I guess we're going to have to be prostitutes. Well, Bishop Nicholas rather, heard of this, and he just could not stand the thought of these girls being destined for that life. So, in the dark of night, Bishop Nicholas went to the home and tossed a bag full of gold coins in through the window to the father. And that would be his eldest daughter's dowry. So the eldest daughter got married, and then later Nicholas did the same for the middle daughter. And by this time, the father was like, now who's doing this? I want to know. And so when it came time for the third daughter, you know, when she was old enough to marry, and the father had a pretty good hunch that this was going to happen again, he actually waited up to see who was tossing gold coins in through his window. And he met Bishop Nicholas, who gave him the gold coins but swore him to secrecy. Clearly, the father did not have a very good sense of what secrecy means, because hundreds of years later we're hearing about this. But that is one of the myths, or legends rather, associated with Nicholas. Now again, we have no way of knowing if this actually happened, but this is a story that people like to tell. Another story is that Bishop Nicholas went into an inn, and he had a sense that something terrible had happened there. This story takes place in a time in history where there was a lot of hunger, people were struggling, people were starving. And the story is that Nicholas went into this inn, and he somehow sensed that the innkeeper had actually murdered 3 young boys, dismembered their bodies, and had them pickling in barrels down in his basement or cellar. And somehow Nicholas was able to divine, I guess, this knowledge, and he went into the basement, and he, I'm assuming, reassembled the bodies first and actually resurrected these boys. The plan had been for the innkeeper to sell the meat from the boys and make himself some money, but Nicholas was like, oh no, not on my watch, you're not doing that. So those are just 2 of the many, many stories associated with Nicholas. And all of that, somewhere along the way, Nicholas kind of became, well, he became Saint Nicholas first, and he became like the patron saint of children and many others. He's like the patron saint for everybody. He is the patron saint of sailors, patron saint for repentant thieves, patron saint for prostitutes, for what else was it? Broadcasters. That's me. You know, he's like everybody's guy. He's like, if you don't really feel like you have somebody in your corner, trust me, St. Nicholas is there somewhere in all of that. St. Nicholas is your dude. From the years 1200 to 1500, Common Era or AD, depending on which you like to use, he was the undisputed gift bringer. He died on December 6th. Let's see, I think it's 330 or 343. December 6th, 343. And after his death, December 6th became, you know, that people celebrated St. Nicholas Day. And on that day, and I know people who celebrate it today, St. Nicholas would leave gifts for children in their shoes, of all places. And this was just undisputed. I mean, he was the guy who brought the gifts. Well, in 1500, the Protestant Revolution happened. And after that happened, saints of all kinds kind of, they were looked down upon. They fell out of favor with the public. And St. Nicholas was not spared this. So St. Nicholas fell out of favor, and all of the saints were just kind of like relegated to the sidelines. But there were still people who refused to give up their saints, and St. Nicholas was one that people refused to give up. So they invented, for example, in the Netherlands, St. Nicholas became Sinterklaas, and he remained the gift giver. Now, because the saints had fallen out of favor, gift giving happened on, you know, that was moved to Christmas, December 25th, to move it away from St. Nicholas Day, because again, after the Protestant Revolution, saints were kind of like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. Even though in secret people were like, oh yes, we are. But the powers that be really wanted to separate Christmas from St. Nicholas Day. So gift giving, I'm sure through clever marketing and so forth, such as it was in 1500, was moved to Christmas, which was a holiday usurped by the church from pagans to, in an attempt to calm people the heck down from all of their drunken festivities, and also in an effort to exert control and possibly convert people to the church. But I digress. So Sinterklaas and other iterations of St. Nicholas began to crop up because the people still wanted to have a gift bringer, but understood that, you know, the saints were not going to be the people to do it anymore, at least according to what the powers that be were telling people. So in some places, like in Germany, for example, while at Christmas time they would focus on the birth of Christ, there was also the understanding that even though Jesus, you know, little tiny baby Jesus, was supposedly the gift bringer, that little tiny infant needed help carrying around all those presents. So there were some assistants who were developed. Now, the interesting thing about these assistants is that they were the gift bringers, yes, absolutely. But they were also designed to scare children into behaving, which isn't entirely unlike what we have today. If you think about, you know, the modern legend of Santa Claus and how this legend is used, it is pretty consistently used to scare children into obedience. You know, if you're on the naughty list, you don't get presents. And then you have things like that god-awful elf on the shelf. And I know a lot of parents use it just to, you know, do funny things, and they don't really stick to the original intention of elf on a shelf. But if you look at how the elf was intended to be used, it was 100% about scaring your children into behaving by convincing them they lived in a police state that was run by elves. Because the elves would spy on them and then go back to the North Pole to report on them. And this was just fine. I mean, yeah, you should definitely be encouraging your children to be okay with living in a police state. I mean, what's wrong with that? So anyway, so the focus shifted to baby Jesus and making the holiday about his birth, not about St. Nicholas, or, you know, being generous in the name of St. Nicholas or what have you. And there were the enforcers. Now, I don't speak German, so I'm not going to attempt the German words. Well, maybe I will. I know the one that really stuck out to me was Klaus. If that's not correct, by all means correct me. But it means Ashy Nicholas. Which just made me laugh when I read that, because Ashy Nicholas, I mean, I'm sure there's like context for that, but oh, it just made me laugh. And there's also Rough Nicholas, and was it Furry Nicholas, I think is the other one. And so these were like the gift bringers and the enforcers of good behavior, because the thing was, you could either behave and get presents, nice presents, or you could misbehave and suffer the consequences, which could be anything from a thrashing with a switch, or kidnapping, which is, of course, a perfectly reasonable way to deal with a misbehaving child. You can beat them or you can have them kidnapped. I mean, what's wrong with that? So this was this was how the deviation away from saints was handled in some cultures. You had the gift bringer and then the enforcers, who were sometimes the same entity. Now, when people started coming over to the colonies, they brought these traditions with them. Both Sinterklaas and Ashy Nicholas made their way over here to carry on these traditions. Now, it's important to understand, as I've mentioned in previous videos, Christmas was not then what it is today. Christmas was more of a family celebration. If it was celebrated publicly, though, it was you know, usually a pretty drunken affair. And so there were some places like the Massachusetts Bay Colony that just basically said no more Christmas. We're going to make that against the law because y'all are acting like fools. And also we want to control everything you do and make you adhere to our religious beliefs, but really we're going to tell you it's because we want you to behave yourselves. Conclude from that what you will. Nevertheless, there were still people who carried on these traditions, whether, you know, very publicly or within their own families. And so the traditions they brought with them didn't go away. They just started to go through a metamorphosis. Christmas as the tradition we know it today, being insofar as it being a family tradition, a time for gathering and so forth, was kind of in its infancy, even into the mid-1800s. It was still the holiday that was still pretty secular. Traditions were still being developed here, you know, here in what we now call the United States of America. You know, back in colonial days, though, it was just kind of like a mishmash of different things. It was pagan traditions, it was European traditions, and so forth, all kind of mixed together. Which really, if you think about it, is kind of what Christmas is anyway. Christmas is really kind of a hodgepodge of all kinds of pagan traditions that have been dressed up to look Christian and so forth and so on. However, the idea of Santa Claus, as we know him today, did not even have its most humble beginnings until 1809. So even though these, you know, so we had St. Nicholas back in, he was born in 270 Common Era, died in 343 Common Era, and in 1809, St. Nicholas, in one form or another, was still the guy. So the St. Nicholas really made an impression. It wasn't until 1809 in Washington Irving's Knickerbocker's History of New York that we got our first glimpse of St. Nicholas flying around, smoking a pipe, flying around with a wagon full of gifts that he was delivering to good children, and switches to naughty children. Naughty, naughty, naughty children. That was the first time St. Nicholas had been somewhat secularized. And that's a trend that would continue. In 1821, I have to consult my notes. So, okay, 1821. Oh, yes, okay, The Children's Friend. So, The Children's Friend was the first publication that stripped the myth associated with St. Nicholas of all religious associations. It was like, we're just done with this. And that is when we first hear the name Santa Claus given to this entity. Languages are not my strong suit, and I try to see how St. Nicholas eventually morphed into Santa Claus. I'm thinking it has something to do with Sinterklaas, and that was the like Americanized version of that name. That's the only thing I can figure. And if you, excuse me, if you know better, I would love for you to tell me, because I'm utterly lost on that. Well, I shouldn't say utterly, but you know what I mean. If you've been watching me long enough, you know. You know. So we had The Children's Friend, the first appearance of the entity known as Santa Claus. And in this version of Santa Claus, he is no longer wearing the robes that he wore as even the gift giver, St. Nicholas. Those are done away with entirely. For this version of Santa Claus, we have a character who is dressed in furs, and he's also dressed in the baggy clothing of the Germanic gift bringers. So this is where we start to see Santa Claus really going through a metamorphosis that would lead him to become the character that we know him as today. It didn't stop there, though. The following year, we would be given the poem that would help really cement Santa Claus into the psyche of Americans and their holiday, specifically Christmas traditions. We were given the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, also known as The Night Before Christmas, by Clarence Clement Moore. And that poem, to this day, is one that people, most of us know at least the first few lines, and it really gave us the aesthetic for Santa. It left enough room for people to draw their own conclusions as far as what he wore and so forth, because the poem tells us a lot about his personality. It tells us a lot about, you know, his Christmas Eve mission, but it doesn't tell us a lot about his clothing. But we do know from reading the poem that he is, quote, a jolly old elf, that he has the big white beard and the rosy cheeks and the, you know, the cherry nose, and he's got a very hearty laugh. And he's just a joyful guy who clearly loves what he's doing, loves it so much that he's willing to fly around in a sleigh all night long to deliver these gifts. And that poem was the first glimpse we got of Santa as that character. Now, the man who wrote the poem, actually, he wrote it for his 6 children. I don't think, from what I read, I don't think the intention had ever necessarily been to publish it. And he didn't publish it till like the year after he wrote it. So it seems that there was somebody along the way who said, hey, this is gold and you should do something with this. And so he did, and now we have that poem that really informs a lot of how we see Santa today. But there was still room for more. It wasn't until 1863 that we got that aesthetic that we're so accustomed to now, as far as how Santa looks, is how he dresses, how he presents himself. In 1863, Thomas Nast, who is a political cartoonist, began drawing Santa for Harper's Weekly. And the Santa that he drew was dressed in the red and white that we're accustomed to seeing. You know, and he had the twinkling eye and the big bushy beard. What's interesting to me is that if you look at the pictures of Santa as he was drawn at the time, he's not wearing the furs. He's actually, in his first picture drawn by Thomas Nast, he's actually wearing long johns. He's wearing red long johns, which, okay, that's an interesting choice. I can kind of see that, I guess. But he by drawing him for Harper's Weekly, and he drew several pictures of Santa Claus, it really gave people finally an image to match with the evolving concept of Santa Claus. And that image really became the basis for everything else that came after it, because it was so loved and it just seemed to fit so well. Well, then what happened? So once America had a pretty well established idea of Santa Claus, it was firmly cemented in our holiday traditions that this is who Santa is, this is what he does, and so forth. Santa actually migrated back to Europe and became known there. Now, it wasn't without controversy, though. There were some people, and there still are, people who did not like the idea of the North American Santa Claus displacing their own local customs and traditions and their own gift givers, their own gift bringer, their own magical gift bringer, I should say. Because we can all bring gifts, but not all of us are magical in that sense. And they really fought hard against it. And there are still a lot there are still countries to this day that are resistant to the idea of the North American Santa Claus and really fight hard to keep their own local traditions and their own magical gift bringer the center of attention. Now, one person who really dearly hated the idea of Santa Claus was Joseph Stalin, which is not entirely surprising because he was generally a pretty awful person. But when the Soviet Union was established, Joseph Stalin decided, you know what? Not only are we going to do away with Christmas, we're going to get rid of this character people are calling Grandfather Frost. That was the name of their Santa-like magical gift bringer. And so Christmas could no longer be celebrated, and all mentions of the magical gift bringer Grandfather Frost were done away with. He would have no part of their festivities, of which there were none. And I don't imagine people gave that guy up very easily. I mean, I don't think that would happen very easily, but it did happen until the 1930s, when Joseph Stalin needed public support, and he realized that one way he could get that would be to allow the re-emergence of the character known as Grandfather Frost. However, he would only allow Grandfather Frost to appear not on Christmas Day, but on New Year's Day. So the giving of gifts would happen on New Year's Day, not Christmas. Furthermore, he did not want Grandfather Frost presented in the traditional red and white garments that Santa Claus and Sinterklaas and so many other magical gift bringers at Christmas time wear. He wanted this character to be completely separated from all of that. So when Grandfather Frost reemerged, he was dressed in yellow yellow. I was just reading a label and it said yellow. Sorry. He was dressed in blue and white, which is fitting. It's Grandfather Frost, but I'm sure at the time, people were like, what? But it caught on. You can still, if you were to look up pictures of Grandfather Frost today, like figurines or someone dressed as Grandfather Frost, that is who you have. You have a character dressed in blue and white. Now, why do they have red and white as Santa's colors? Well, that is because it is believed that, you know, based on paintings and so forth from the time, that red and white were the colors of the robes that Bishop Nicholas and other bishops wore. So it only made sense to have red and white be the colors that Santa Claus would wear, because he is based on St. Nicholas. So nowadays, in 2020, Santa Claus is, at least the legend of Santa Claus, is alive and well. He's recognized all over the world. I think I'm going to regret this. Oh well, that's okay. We're just going to go with it. Sometimes when you're doing makeup, you do something that seems like a really good idea, and then you see it on your face and you're like, ooh, that was not good. But that's okay. I firmly believe there are no mistakes in makeup. You can make anything work. You just might have to spend a little more time doing it. But anyhow, Santa Claus is known, or at least some version of Santa Claus is known all over the world. And some parents choose to tell their kids the myth of Santa Claus, or the legend of Santa Claus. Others do not. When I was growing up, if you didn't believe in Santa Claus, you didn't get presents. Which I think about that now and I'm like, well, that's silly. That's some micromanaging of people's beliefs, but okay. Now with my own child, I told him the truth about Santa at a very young age, because, you know, when he was younger, I wasn't receiving child support. I had almost no money for Christmas gifts at all. And there were so many things he wanted, and if I couldn't get it for him, he thought, well, I'll just ask Santa. Which is all fine and good, except that it's odd that Santa and Mommy are kind of the same person. So I finally reached a point where I thought he just needs to know the truth, because I don't want him getting his hopes up about getting all these gifts from Santa only to find out that Santa couldn't deliver. And I also had concerns as he got older about, you know, Santa being able to deliver some kids these epic toys and then other kids getting almost nothing because their parents couldn't afford to give them much. And I thought, well, I don't really want to feed into that. So I told him the truth early on. And what I told him, and what, I still stand by today, is that Santa Claus is part of a game that people play at Christmas. And he inspires people to be kind and generous, but he is not necessarily a real person. And that people can give gifts and say they're from Santa, kind of acting on his behalf. And so really, the spirit of Santa is what's real, not necessarily Santa as a physical person. And I felt okay with that. My son did not. He would eventually get quite upset with me for having told him the truth so early. But, it is what it is. We make choices as parents and we can't undo them, and, life goes on. But I also couldn't stand the idea of lying to my son and convincing him that there's an actual physical being that comes to our house called Santa Claus, who, by the way, has been spying on him all year and taking note of his various naughty or nice actions and giving gifts accordingly. I just didn't like any of that. So for many, many years, it has been the narrative that we've used is it's part of a game and it's a lot of fun. It's not real, but you can still have a good time with it, and you can still use Santa as an inspiration to be a kinder and more generous person. I don't know about this eye makeup, you guys. I just don't know. This is not going how I wanted it to, but that's okay. That is okay. There are so many things in my life that have not gone as I wanted them to, and they ultimately turned out fine. I do think, though, I need to pause and focus for a moment, because talking to you, as wonderful as it is, makes it hard for this newbie, which I definitely am, to focus on the task at hand. So I'm going to pause, and I'll be right back with my finished look and some final thoughts. Please hold. All right, I am back. Do you like my hair? I just thought this was such a fun candy cane inspired wig. I had to get it. So yes, that is the history of Santa, as I understand it. I'm sure there are important things I left out. If you'd like to add that in the comments, please do. So as I'm researching things for these videos, I always come across very interesting tidbits of information that aren't necessarily connected to what I'm talking about, but are nevertheless interesting to me. So while I was researching Santa, and more specifically how he's perceived around the world, I learned that in Japan, it's considered a traditional Christmas dinner to have KFC. And I thought, that is so weird. Like, how did that happen? Well, let me tell you. So in 1970, the first ever Kentucky Fried Chicken in Japan opened. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, the first Kentucky Fried Chicken in Japan opened in 1970. That's what I was trying to say. In 1974, Kentucky Fried Chicken began an ad campaign known as Kentucky for Christmas. And what they did, and it's unclear as to who started this, there's no definitive answer, but what Kentucky Fried Chicken did was begin marketing Kentucky Fried Chicken as a traditional American Christmas dinner. They presented the idea that in America, everyone has Kentucky Fried Chicken for Christmas. There was apparently, and maybe there still is, a desire to emulate what Americans did. And Kentucky Fried Chicken capitalized on this and made it just a staple of the Christmas tradition in Japan. It's important to note that in Japan, Christmas is a very secular holiday. There are only about 1% of the population in Japan is Christian. And Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC as it's now known, just really ran with the freedom to make Christmas a very commercial thing. I mean, we do that in the United States too. But it's interesting that KFC did and still does market their dinners as a typical American meal at Christmas time. So in Japan, it's very typical. If you don't order they call them party barrels, and it includes coleslaw, chicken, and cake. If you don't order your party barrel ahead of time, there are people who will literally wait in line for hours for their KFC party barrel to have with their, to share with their family and friends for Christmas. This is such a big thing that I think it's about a 3-day period that KFC in Japan has this promotion. Something like 3.5 million families will get party barrels to share for the holiday. In Japan, the Colonel Sanders statues and so forth are dressed as Santa, and it's just a thing, and it's a thing that surprised me. I love finding out these little tidbits of information as I'm researching. It's just really fun for me to know all these useless facts. So I wanted to, now that I've got the Kentucky Fried Chicken out of the way, I wanted to take a minute to read to you the poem that gave us our modern day Santa, The Night Before Christmas, by Clement Clark Moore. Are you ready? Grab some hot cocoa, settle in, and I'm going to read you a story. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads, and Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the hurricane, or the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew, like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. This will probably be my last video before Christmas unless I get something on my mind that I have to talk to you about. Most likely it'll be my last video before Christmas though. So I hope you have a great holiday, whatever you're celebrating. And if you'd like to contribute to future content, there are multiple ways to do so. I've listed those in the description below. Other than that though, take care of yourself. Be good to yourself, be good to each other. Don't should on yourself or anyone else. And I know we're living in some weird times and things are not like we prefer them to be at Christmas, but things done differently are still done. So let's celebrate what we can do, okay? And if we all play it safe and wear masks and practice social distancing and stay home when we can, we'll get through this all the faster. So I'll see you after the holiday, and thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate you more than you know. If you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share. It really would be a great Christmas gift for me. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.